So at Northdale Lutheran School, our mission is to assist families by providing an excellent education in a safe Christian environment. There are many ways to exercise that mission, and the opportunities are ever evolving, and COVID has presented some unique challenges and opportunities to us carrying out that mission, but it remains the same. We assist, we partner with families. We do not replace them in the Christian education of their children that they've entrusted to our care. As we undertake this process, we want to do so in an excellent way. And we are an accredited school, which helps us maintain that excellent status. Safe has a whole new meaning now with COVID. It used to mean like a safe place to not be bullied and to be able to take educational risks, you know, the good kind, the appropriate kind, and locked doors and things like that. Well, now we're battling an unseen nemesis with this coronavirus. But nonetheless, an opportunity to partner with our families to pursue excellence as we address those concerns, all while doing it from the Christian perspective. So what exactly are we up against with this COVID situation? Well, the graphic here I downloaded, was that this morning or last night, just to show where we're at with the spread of COVID. And it's significant. You've probably seen this graphic before in news media or online. It's John Hopkins provided that, and no slight against Australia. When I did the screenshot, I must have cut them off inadvertently. So no offense intended there. But you can see we're Florida, the United States, lots of red on that screen, and top of the list. So clearly a global pandemic of epic proportions. None of us have lived through something like this before. It's not the first, and it likely won't be the last, but it's the one we're facing right now. We've got a number of people that we know personally and in our community, in our families, maybe ourselves, with health vulnerabilities. That's a serious threat. This is a highly contagious disease and very deadly to those vulnerable populations. And some have to be very, very careful and take the utmost precautions. Some of those are in our school families. It's presenting a challenge to educational needs, in person, online, special needs, challenging students who have the abilities and need that extra challenge, how to run and operate a school in a safe and excellent way. It's impacting our economy clearly, wading through all the stimulus and grants and the community's presences that are changing, businesses that aren't surviving and are getting shut down or letting employees go because this is impacting them in disproportionate ways. So that's very real. Personal preferences seem to abound, depending on what information sources you're paying attention to. What I hear a lot lately is the masks. Yes and no, and feeling very strongly for and against them. My child needs to be in person. My child can't be in person, and they have to have a distance learning option, and so on. But unfortunately, the negative side of this, because of the sinful world that we live in, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation that we have to weed through. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit on this next slide. I gave some examples with masks and the polarizing topic that can be. Our county has taken a position on it for the benefit of the people who live here. And there are different ways to apply those, especially in a private school, religious school, church setting that we are. We have to make some additional choices that the county doesn't set for us, but things that a responsibility that we have to ensure our people are safe if they're coming to worship in person, or coming to take a school tour, or in a couple of weeks coming back to school. Gathering sizes, the mis and disinformation about that, phase 1 to however many phases there are, and what's the difference, and how do we move from one phase to another, and why some counties seem to be ahead of pace on others, different states. It can be very confusing. Test results. It was in the news not too long ago. Florida, of course. Florida gets a lot of news media attention, not always beneficial, but I'm not a politician. I think you know that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a representative of the CDC. I don't represent any major news outlets or anything like that. I shared before what I am. I suppose it's important for me to share what I am not. I'm just taking things that I've heard my school families talk about these topics a lot and have a lot of confusion about it, and what's being reported accurately and what isn't, and questioning those sources. The benefits of the different options we have for education delivery. And in our public school district, we've got several options that are in-person, online, and hybrids, and tracking with the class, or exclusively online, and how long you have to commit to those things. Those are some tough decisions that, even though they are not necessarily students in my school, I have families that are split between public and private education options, charter ones, and they're asking me for advice. So I've tried to help wade through those options with them. You can find a study to prove any position you want, for and against masks. What's the right kind of social distancing guidelines to follow, and what size gatherings, and so on. I've got very passionate school board members that do read a lot and are very willing to share the information they have, but we have to do so with discerning eyes and consider the source. Misinformation and disinformation abound at times like this of panic, chaos, uncertainty, and it's nothing new. I think we could all give examples of this in our lives and in previous major events in our country's history. But disinformation, just to distinguish between the two, disinformation really has more to do with taking truths and sharing them in ways that weren't meant to be shared. Oftentimes, disinformation is a combination of majority truth, but an element of some forgery or misinformation being mixed in. Misinformation just has to do with wrong information that is maybe being shared as truth. And social media is a huge blessing and a great opportunity in so many ways, but it can also be a huge challenge to controlling disinformation and misinformation, because it can spread in unprecedented ways that we haven't seen in the history of information technology. But so it's important to have discernment, and as a school, that's something we try and teach our students, is that discernment and considering the source and the authenticity of the source, and validating and verifying the accuracy of the source. Is this quality information that I am consuming right now? To be certain, our knowledge base has shifted dramatically from March, when this first started, to the present day, and even our CDC and federal government has shifted positions on masks. The message at first was, yeah, you don't need to, it doesn't really help you, to a new message of, well, it may not do anything for you, but it's certainly beneficial to those around you, especially if you're asymptomatic. So as new information comes out, that changes our position on some of this, and the information can change. And that's not necessarily disinformation or misinformation. It's just updated information that unfortunately can be used to confuse and misinform people, to back positions that aren't accurate or reliable. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful that we're not contributing to those things, and we have to be careful that we are filtering the information that we receive. There are a few guiding principles that I latched onto fairly early on this summer as I was researching and developing health safety plans for reopening for my school. And I just thought it was really practical, and I wanted to share it with you. This comes from the first one from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Be flexible and nimble in responding to new information, what we just talked about. Policies should be practical, feasible, and appropriate for child and adolescents' developmental stages. I have some medically connected parents in my school population, and they have been connecting me with some of these great resources, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, I would say, is one of them. But that really resonated with me. Practical, feasible, and appropriate. That's a mantra I've used with my teachers here and my school families, that we're trying to do that and not necessarily appease the whims and desires, not necessarily appease polarizing points of view, but let's find that middle road. Let's be practical, feasible, and appropriate for the sake of our kids. This one came from the Commissioner of Education for the state of Florida, Richard Cochran. And again, I'm not a representative of his, but this comment did jump out to me, and 2 words in here resonated with me. Throughout this, 2 constants remain: keeping our education community safe and ensuring our students receive a first-class education in Florida. And he addressed this to all schools, public, private, charter. And our default is to always show compassion and grace. I've attended, I don't even know how many hours of state level school leader webinars as we seek to disseminate good information, and the Florida Department of Education is working hard to do that for public, private, and charter schools. I don't know Richard Cochran's background, if he's a religious person or not, but compassion and grace jump out to me as a religious person, as a Christian, and those are very commonly used phrases in churches in our school as a Christian school, to show compassion and grace. And that is something that we're running with here at our institution, that what is the most loving thing that we can do for that parent that feels very strongly, for this one that is misinformed, for these kids that we are blessed to serve and every day in the midst of a pandemic. How can we serve them with compassion and grace? So what's our focus? There's a list here. I don't think you're surprised to see anything on this list. And the graphic tries to illustrate all those things. We are focused on providing a Christian education to our families, working with them, partnering with them to do so in an excellent and safe way for our students, staff. And we are developing a whole new toolkit, a whole new toolbox of things to use, that, or using what we already had in the toolbox in different ways. We are in unprecedented times, but I've seen some fantastic examples of resiliency and creativity from people in my school community, in the Northdale community that I live in. I'm within walking distance. I ride my bike every day, so I don't leave this community very often because of where I live in relation to where I work. But it's a privilege to see some of that and get some good ideas. It's a blessing to be able to do these lunch and learns with Cava, because we all benefit from them in different ways, but there's something for everybody through each of these presentations. So that's our focus. How are we trying to meet these needs as we develop programs to safely educate our students and the tools to get that done? We live in a very dynamic environment for our school community. Information sources and what's reliable, what's consistent. So I don't have any shortage of school parents that want to share everything that they see online, in the news media, on social media with me. And while I'm glad to have those open lines of communications and they're comfortable sharing things with me, I also find it overwhelming and sometimes disheartening, because it's just too much to process. It is too much to internalize and then you use wisely to inform future decisions. So I've had to narrow the scope of my information sources to the ones that are most effective, most reliable, most relevant to me as a school leader. And I'm very open with my family. Said, great, thanks for being in touch and continuing to communicate with your school, but I can't pay attention to the same things that you pay attention to, and that's okay. We have some different areas of responsibility as parents, as school leaders, as teachers. But it does affect my decision process. That's why I had to narrow it down. And when I'm filtering this information for my teachers and school board, because they are also a part of the decision process. It led us to develop a health and safety plan for reopening. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but we are clearly having impacts on the classroom, in person and online. Classroom isn't the classroom as we've known it for the history of education in America. Yeah, online education, distance learning is nothing new, but at this level, it's a fairly new thing, and it's totally different to have it mandated and required like it was for us starting in March when everything shut down. Ready or not, here we go. Distance learning, here we come. And that was a major challenge and shift. These teachers didn't sign up to be online teachers. That's usually something you get to pick for being an online teacher in Florida virtual school or a university or something like that, where it's more commonplace and expected. These teachers had to adjust their thinking and approach to education in some pretty dramatic ways. And we have to be careful to do it well. But it clearly is having an impact on our families, students, and teachers. I see a comment came through. I should take a look at this. Yeah, I'm actually going to talk about that in a coming up slide about the emotional impact that some of this is having on our students and what we are attempting to do to help with that. So I'll come back to that. Thank you, Diane, for making that comment. We talked about information sources. I pulled this again. Oh, must have done it this morning. Or, this was reported last night. I think I pulled it up this morning, but put this screenshot in here just to show what the trends are. What is incredibly interesting to me, and I've had parents point this out to me, is you look back at March, it's hardly perceptible on the scale of this graph, what's going on in Hillsborough County, yet that's when we shut everything down. Down here, highest levels we've ever seen, and yet we're talking about reopening school. What gives? Why would we do that? That doesn't make sense. Well, what we knew back then was a lot less than what we know now. We tend to fear the unknown, and we respond accordingly. We feel like we've learned a lot. There's a lot to learn. And with the proper health safety planning, we feel that, and the options for parents and families, we feel like we can still do school, but it's going to look differently. This was kind of a knee-jerk, we had to do something reaction. We didn't know what else to do, so we just shut it down. Now we've had some time to study and think and do some research, and the options available to us are very different on the other side, even though our situation has changed dramatically. That's Hillsborough County. This is Florida as a whole, and similar trends, but of course on a much more significant scale. So our process after reviewing all those sources is to develop a health and safety plan for reopening. And this is a very simplified version of the cycle that we followed. We communicated, we surveyed, and we communicated, and then repeat that process as much as necessary. The first survey was to gather information. Then we processed that. We interpreted it, we put together an action plan, and then we did another survey to have people respond to it. And that process will continue. When our families responded to in-person or distance learning accommodation options, we said, we're not setting this in stone. You get to pick this now based on how you're feeling now. We'll continue to revisit this with you. But we made it clear that we were considering quality sources from our county, state, federal level. And we are taking that middle of the road approach that I alluded to earlier, so that create as many options for those that feel very strongly about in-person or online. Oh, there's an option for both of you. Masks and how we're handling that. And yeah, you can wear a mask all day. That's not a problem if that's what you're comfortable with. But we also have some very specific criteria of when masks are definitely required and when they become a bit more optional based on physical distancing parameters and other guidelines that have to be met first. But ultimately, we're working to manage risk, not remove it. That would be an unrealistic expectation to try and remove risk. Just can't. Getting closer to Diane's question here, I broke down our priorities on that list before we had families. So I'm going to start with the parent guardian ones. And these are the things that I hear from families most often. And they're shared. Safety of my kid, and can they go to school? And this place I always thought of as really safe now has this danger that is far harder to contain and control. And what am I doing to my family? And the health vulnerabilities that exist in my home? What's the risk of exposure that we're facing? I have a choice to make: in person, distance learning, and in person is going to look different. Distance learning is going to look different, even different than it did in the fourth quarter in March to the end of the school year. We've made some improvements. There are more options available to us through our schools. What level of involvement is it going to have on me as a parent, especially if my kid is distance learning, and how do I balance that with work life? Face coverings, again, that's the one I hear the most about, and what's from the when and how to the what face coverings should look like. Our student priorities that we're working to address: in-person versus distance learning, since some of our students will be learning online, some will be learning in person. Incidentally, all our surveys are indicating a vast majority of our families want in-person education. We've attracted more families because of that. We're at that small bubble, that it's more intimate. I know what the exposure risks are in a smaller school compared to a larger school, and still have the flexibility to do in-person or distance learning at any time. And they're going to track synchronously so that families can move in and out as needed. God forbid a kid gets sick, or a situation at home were to change and they have to leave the in-person option or leave the distance learning option, join us back in class, that we're tracking together. That's going to dramatically affect student procedures, expectations, and accountability, depending on what setting you're in, and when and how and where and what kind of face coverings to wear. The emotional health of our students: we are working hard with some professional development of our teachers to be more in tune with how the pandemic school environment is affecting our students, and red flags to watch for, and resources that we can tap into to meet them on a physical, spiritual, and emotional, social front as those concerns are expressed. And we partner with resources in-house and some online counseling services for our students and staff that we are able to do by referral. So we're seeing more of a need for these things than we have in the past, and we're learning about those tools and ways to help our students de-stress and be set up for success. Our staff priorities: these are things that our teachers are concerned about, in-person and distance learning. Some of our teachers are very concerned about, how am I going to run 2 classrooms? I'm going to have these kids watching online and these kids watching me face-to-face. How do I balance my responsibility to those right here and those that are at home under parents, guardians' care? Best practices and professional development. Our teachers have been engaging in a lot of that over the summer months to get better at that balancing act and learn new tools, how to do online Google Classroom, those kind of things. We haven't had a lot of time to do research to inform best practices, but we've decided to focus on a few areas. That synchronous delivery of instruction while in person is going on has been our focus, and what are research proven strategies and tools that can work. It's going to be different at the lower grades than it is in the middle and the upper grades, but we are developing customized plans to address those unique needs. And the procedures, expectations that go along with it. Face coverings for our teachers: how can they teach with those things covering their face? And we're working through some strategies on how to resolve those concerns. Also, the emotional health of our teachers: those same counseling services that we are making use of, and some online ones, even from the Christian perspective, are available to our teachers too. At an unprecedented level, we have some great resources to help make that possible. So here's a collage of all the tools of COVID education, many of which I never thought would be a requirement when I started teaching 16 years ago. The scene has changed quite a bit. How much longer are we going to continue to need these things? And what's it going to look like on the other side remains to be seen. I'm going to do this very quickly because this is unless you have specific questions about it, but these are an abundance of grants galore that are all tied to the CARES Act that my institution is taking advantage of. Payroll protection program, a lot of places in our community have done that. Governor's emergency education relief is to help those that were most vulnerable during distance learning, help remediate reading skills. And so some of our students will be benefiting from that. And these, by the way, are available to public, private, and charter schools proportionately. So there's even more available to our public schools. The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, that's going to help us with some of those from the previous slide, tool purchases that we need to do in person and online education. So we're thankful for those opportunities to make use of those funds, and we are getting pretty good at stretching those as far as we possibly can. But every crisis has its own challenges and opportunities that come along with it. An analogy I use with my teachers a lot is keeping that pencil sharp. And this is challenging us to think differently about education. It is challenging us in developing and enhancing, pursuing different instructional techniques and use of technology that previously was not thought of or not necessary. We, as a private school with scholarship students, are under the same requirement every other school is in the state of Florida to provide to the Department of Education an instructional continuity plan by the end of this week. Our plan is in development, refining it. It'll be submitted ahead of the deadline, but it's got 6 areas of focus that we need to make sure we cover as we plan for in-person and distance learning, whether we're doing both or, God forbid, the time comes where we're required to switch to all distance learning again. We have a well-organized plan in place that meets the same criteria that our public school counterparts, charter school counterparts are required to meet. But it has been, in a twisted kind of way, a blessing, because people, as I alluded to before, are looking for that more intimate bubble, minimized risk of exposure compared to large schools, and our enrollment has grown. We ended last year with 67 students, VPK through 8th grade. This year, as of last night, I had a meeting and I reported 71 current enrollees, and there's a number still in the pipeline. I would anticipate we're going to be mid to upper 70s by the time we start school the week of August 10th. So regardless, our mission remains the same, and the way we exercise it just shifts a little bit, but we will continue to partner with our families to provide an excellent education, a safe Christian environment. I just want to conclude with some scriptural encouragement. I'm a pretty spiritual guy, teaching and leading at a parochial school, a private Christian school like this. And these are some passages that have really resonated with me lately. From John, this is Jesus talking, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." Easier said than done, but Jesus is our ultimate source of peace. And that word peace is something that really resonates with me, because we're not getting it from the world right now and the craziness around us. It comes from God alone, that inner peace that, you know, as trying as it is, Jesus has, in this next passage, overcome the world. In this world you will have trouble. Understatement of the existence of the world. But take heart, I have overcome the world. And that is huge. He said this at the time John's gospel was written. It's just as true then as it is today. And finally, Philippians, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. We get anxious when the things we think should be happening diverge from the way things actually are going. And as that gap widens, our anxiety levels increase. But when we do the weird thing that the Apostle Paul is talking about here, is pray with thanksgiving, even in those anxious moments, it's that peace that comes out through our words and actions in our prayer life. And we come to terms with the turmoil around us, knowing that, hey, God's got this. So thank you for the opportunity to share some information with you. I could not cover everything as thoroughly as I would have liked, or maybe you were looking for in this, and for that I apologize, but I'm thankful for the opportunity nonetheless. And here's my contact information. If you want to follow up on anything and get more specific with me, I would be more than happy to engage you in some ongoing discussion.
Thank you very much, Dane. That was amazing. So much information and much needed. So we greatly appreciate that. And I don't know if if anyone has any additional questions for Dane.
How can we help you get more business, Mr. Dane?
Well, I gave a few plugs for some CABA connections that we've had, but as we continue to network, that's huge. If you know of anybody who's struggling with some of these choices and wants the ability to hash this out and struggle through them on a more personal level, we've got some very caring teachers here that are very engaged with our families and very accessible. And what I'm finding is that it's best done on a very personal level. It's hard to meet the wide range of needs with a broad stroke of a paintbrush. It needs to be more personal, more individualized, and that's kind of where we specialize. And let's listen first and then address the needs together. So the more we can share, the more we can network, the more we can refer, I think helps build our communities and builds us up as businesses too.
Yeah, that quote said this world has troubles, but I also interpret that as challenges or problems that need to be solved. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Right. You put a bunch of passionate people together, we will find solutions under God's grace, and he will bless them.
That's right.
Yeah.